and welcome to Capitalise's Economic Accounting Bites. This time a little different from our usual market review, because given we've just had the budget, in case you noticed, and as businesses are now navigating this new world where Labour have definitely, as the government, put their stamp on their own policies, we thought it'd be useful to hear from the membership bodies in the accounting world. But before I introduce our guest, though, I'm grateful that Paul Surtees, CEO of Capitalise, is still here with me to share what we're finding as we talk to accountants and businesses around the country. So, Paul, hello again.
Hey, Kirsty. Hope you're well.
I am. So, now over to our guest. I'm especially delighted to welcome this episode a special guest, Ian Wright, a former MP who, don't hold it against him, who has worked at ICAEW now, though, for over 7 years, and in March was appointed their, wait for this, Chief Policy and Communications Officer. A very grand title indeed. Welcome, Ian.
Hello, Kirsty. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. So let's plough in and start with the budget, and then hopefully we'll move to some more positive things, which are maybe less in the headlines, but which could be really important for our accounting firms and their clients. So Ian, look, what messages have you been sharing with government on behalf of the ICAEW members, and what's the general reaction post-budget?
Well, in the run-up to the budget, Kirsty, we talk to members who are running and advising businesses. They are really a great source of information and insight as to how business and the economy is working. And they increasingly, and it is getting worse, tell us that to do business is too expensive, it's too complicated, and it's too uncertain. And that last one, I think, in the run-up to the budget, with all this speculation, are we going to see a rise of income tax? Are we going to see an exit tax? There will be a wealth tax. People made decisions about their businesses or were advising clients based upon speculation. That was not good for business. That chills investment and confidence. But then just doing too much in terms of that complicating factor, again, is not great for business. Let's try and simplify, give a clear roadmap as to how businesses can navigate. And then you will see innovation, entrepreneurialism, and ultimately growth and rising living standards. And that's what we all want, isn't it? We want our businesses to thrive. We want the people of this country to feel better off. I don't think the budget will provide that. I don't think business was actually the main focus of this budget. Now, in many respects, that could be a good thing. Last year's budget, you saw an increase in national insurance contributions. And that did have very clearly a chilling effect on investment, on maybe recruitment. And I think growth suffered as a result of that. Business was not the focus this year. There was obviously lots of different things, complicating factors. There were some good things, doubling of EIS in terms of investment, that, in terms of venture capital trust. Again, that's a good thing. But actually, in the main things like dividend tax increases, savings tax increases, a range of different things, as well as the big picture stuff about that income tax threshold being frozen well out into the 2030s, we're not seeing a positive story to tell on growth. That is the key point. And we polled, just for my final point here on this point, Kirsty, is we polled in real time as the Chancellor was speaking and in the hours immediately afterwards, and got a strong response from our members. And of over 1,000 members polled in the 12 hours after the budget, over 4/5 said this was not a budget for growth. It was too complicated. It lacked a coherent strategy and ultimately would not result in rising living standards. So that's the message, unfortunately, we have to give to government. We have to make sure that growth, improved productivity, improved competitiveness for the UK, and ultimately rising living standards, people feeling better off, has to be the number one priority. Not sure this budget was the opportunity to do that, or certainly wasn't taken as a good opportunity.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the budget not being for growth in this context. We haven't gone out and polled, but from the conversations that our funding team are having with the various businesses, in terms of the the impact of the budget, it really is that sense of this transition of funding away from growth and into working capital, and something that we've seen quite a lot this year, actually more into emergency type funding. And so what you're seeing from the polling is actually being completely reflected from a funding perspective in terms of the SMEs that we see, both from accountants and from direct. I think from the markets as well, we saw a little bit of volatility come through, post, but ultimately both the FTSE and the bond yields are implying, that this was not a growth positive budget indeed. So,
and on that point, Kirsty, just to respond to Paul, I think in many respects you're absolutely right. In terms of accountants, advisors to SMEs, will have seen this not as a budget for growth. In many respects, it might have been harder to produce growth, to be ambitious, to aspire to, a better salary, higher growth, that sort of thing. But your point about the markets and the bond markets, they were largely indifferent to it. I don't think they moved that much, and that was, in many respects, a positive thing. We didn't see a Liz Truss 2022 budget response, but we did see this. I think the market's response was a reflection of business was not the focus and priority of this budget here.
Agreed.
Well, let's turn to something a little bit more positive, because if we go back to last year's budget, or back to the beginning of the Labour government, they launched this industrial strategy last year. And professional and business services is one of the 8 sectors in the so-called IS8, which includes accountants, obviously. Now, you're involved very much. You're as vice chair, is that your role, I think, as the council leading?
Co-chair, actually.
Co-chair.
I co-chair it with a government minister.
Co-chair, sorry, I've demoted you. So co-chair. Now, the council is made up of some members from, as you said, Department of Business and Trade, and also a lot of the private firms in all the professional services sectors, including accountants, but also law and architects and so on. So can you just give our audience a bit of an understanding as to where you're up to with this work for the PBS sector, and what can we expect to see going forward?
For the first time ever, Kirsty, for a strategy of this type, professional and business services has been included as a priority. And the industrial strategy is essentially the story of where will Britain's growth come from in the next 10 years? Where are the sectors where we've got a comparative advantage? We're really good, and the global economy has an increasing demand. And so, as you said, there are 8 priority growth sectors, the IS8, and it's advanced manufacturing, it's defense industries, it's the creative industries, financial services. And as I said, for the first time ever, professional and business services have been included, and quite rightly so. In terms of our strengths, it's unbelievable. We as a sector generate £300 billion for this country every single year. 1 in 7 jobs in the UK are in our sector. But we're at a bit of an inflection point. And this is where the industrial strategy and the dedicated bespoke sector plan for professional and business services really prioritises things. That sector plan, Kirsty, is essentially the story about how will the sector cope with technological change, and particularly the advancement of artificial intelligence. We can go 2 ways. We can ignore AI and just think it's not going to affect us. And then, if I'm really honest, Kirsty, if we do that, if we have that approach, or we do this wrongly, AI will sweep us away. There will be whole professions, whole sectors that are just rendered obsolete as a result of AI. Or we can embrace it. We can use it as that tool to enhance productivity, enhance efficiencies, and win extra business for the sector and win extra business for Britain. So that's the challenge. So in terms of the sector plan and a range of different measures, the other thing to mention is, how do we pivot government funding to those growth sectors? Rather than having a sector blind approach and spreading the jam too thinly, How do we realign government funding to make sure that they can concentrate on those sectors? So things like the Make Smarter program that had investment, making sure that professional and business services firms have the ability to get those, to make sure that in terms of the advancement of professional services on skills, making sure they get access to funding as well, putting professional and business services expertise in embassies around the world. I mean, don't forget, we are the second biggest exporter of professional services anywhere in the world, second only to the US. But how do we make sure that everybody in the sector can think about exporting their services as well? Yesterday, I was in Leeds. DBT, the Department for Business and Trade, are having roadshows. This was a big part of the sector plan. And I think this is really important, Kirsty. And you and I have talked about this. You were at the Manchester roadshow event. If industrial strategy is going to mean anything, it's got to be relevant and meaningful to small businesses. The idea that you've got this really nice, glamorous, glossy document, either, published or on your iPad, and then, people in Manchester, Leeds, and across the country, SMEs, running businesses, advising businesses, have no idea, and it doesn't affect their business at all. Well, we failed. So making sure that, you get in contact, you bring them close, you advise them of the various support mechanisms for AI, for skills, for exports. And that's the purpose of this roadshow. We're well on the way. We've done Manchester, we've done Leeds, we're going to do further ones in 2026. So again, bringing the sector plan, bringing industrial strategy to life, and hopefully making those connections in the regions and nations of the UK to make sure that professional and business services firms can thrive.
Yeah, and I think one of the outputs from the council of the Made Smarter campaign, I was a huge supporter of that when it was in the manufacturing sector, and it's been spoken about on this podcast many times by myself. So the fact we're rolling that into professional and business services is fantastic. And I know they're starting, it's probably not been publicised very well yet, but they're starting a pilot, aren't they, in April for some of the northern regions. So accountancy firm businesses in the northern regions, as well as other professional services businesses in the north, in some of the northern regions, are going to have access to this as a pilot from April. So I am very into that, don't worry, Ian, to try and make sure that lots of local firms know about that in the north.
Sorry, Kirsty, if I also you make a really important point, which is I worry about two things. I worry that if people in general think about professional services firms, they think of either massive global businesses.
Yeah.
And it's great that global businesses are centered in the UK. That's fantastic. Let's not push big business away.
No.
But actually, 99.7% of professional and business services firms are small and medium-sized enterprises.
Yep.
99% of firms in the sector have fewer than 4 employees. We are a sector of micro businesses.
Yep.
And they've got to feel that this is relevant. And the other thing, and again, you've touched upon, is, well, it's all about London and the Southeast. No, it's not. We have got some great businesses determined and ambitious to grow. As I said, I saw them in Leeds yesterday. Absolutely fantastic. And making sure those programs and initiatives that you mentioned, the one starting in April, going across the north, the northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber and the northeast. But then a big part of the sector plan is the establishment of regional hubs. And there are 5 regional hubs outside of London and the southeast: Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and West Yorkshire, and the Glasgow-Edinburgh corridor as well. Hopefully there'll be more rolled out later on, where you can bring those small professional and business services sector firms together to learn about things like skills. The idea of those clusters working together, learning together and growing together are going to be really exciting. So I am really excited about these PBS hubs that will be rolled out as part of the sector plan.
Yeah, and it's for accountants to find out and use those because it is a great opportunity. So, Paul, let's just think about what you're hearing about on the platform and you in your relationships with accountants and their clients. There's a huge funding gap for UK SMEs. So what do you think the opportunity is for accountants here, especially in the face of the budget and also maybe this industrial strategy?
I think that to both of your points, actually, there's some really great work going on at a government level to try and push out support for small businesses. There's a call for evidence, into SME funding earlier on in the year. There's another one currently going on about the business referral program. There's one for CCDS in terms of credit scores. So there's lots of government initiatives in that context. Obviously, for those who listen to Accounting Bites and have been, working with us at Capitalise for a long time, know that we are super passionate about the role that accountants have in this space. And Ian, you talk about AI and productivity and the opportunity to win more business and so on. We were both at an event last week, and I was speaking of the opportunity to be more human, to reach out, to demonstrate empathy, and to help businesses thrive with the knowledge and relationships that they have. And I think that the budget serves as a crucial opportunity. One side of it is already passed, and I've got some interesting data on that, is that the budget is a great opportunity for an accountant to pick up the phone and simply say, what's keeping you up at night? There's nothing like, can I do more tax? Can I do more compliance? Can I help you with funding or do those things? It's literally just an opportunity to call your clients. Now, I had an advisory board with some of the largest firms in the UK, and I polled them, earlier on in the month, how many of their clients had they called individually, their team, and as an organization. Individually, it was about 40%, their team was about 20%, and their assumption was less than 10% across the business. That touch point is such a simple touch point, and I think solving the funding gap starts with questions like, what's keeping you up at night? Or what is it that you aspire for in your family? Really simple, empathic, human conversations that AI simply cannot do. As advisors, they've got a really privileged position because they've obviously got the relationship. Typically, accountants will be working with their clients for 8 to 10 years. That's a typical lifetime, of a good established client. So they've got the data relationship and trust, and with that, that means they can actually deliver really meaningful outcomes. And the British Business Bank data implies that for every pound borrowed, £4 of economic value will go back into into the system. And part of that, and some of the things that you talk about, SEIS, EIS, VCTs, all of those components, are often, like startup loans, oriented towards getting businesses to start, getting them to year one, getting them to year two. Alica Bank has got a really interesting strategy, focusing on about 20, 30,000 of the larger, more established businesses. But accountants will typically have relationships with established businesses because ultimately that's where they can get slightly larger work, slightly larger fees. And in that space, that's where we can really make a massive difference. And that's what we see. So typically we will see larger transactions coming from accountants than we do from the direct platform and the internet. And the best thing is that accountants provide a protective layer. So commercially, whilst it might not be wonderful for us when the accountant says that's too expensive or we don't like the covenants, that is the best possible thing for the business. And the accountant is stepping in and protecting the business in that context, in the sense of some rates and so on. And so that's a really amazing protective layer that can be introduced. So I think this is hugely beneficial for the UK economy and the employee multiplier. But, and there is a but, and I'm gonna maybe get your views in, but we see only a small portion of firms who want to go and do that, and that's evidenced by what's keeping you up at night going into the budget. And within those firms, we see an even smaller proportion of individuals and people who feel equipped and able to have those conversations. So from our perspective, it's a huge opportunity. AI, I think, presents a turning point as an opportunity. And it feels to me a little bit like now is the time, to really kind of get into that space.
Kirsty, could I respond to Paul? And maybe
No.
this is not good for your webinar because you'll want some, conflict and dispute. But I agree with everything that Paul says. And I really want to focus on two things. I'm very conscious as co-chair of the Professional and Business Services Council is we're very different to other sectors for a number of different things. One is we don't require money. We don't really require bailouts. This is a successful sector. We need to see realignment of government funding for certain things, but in the main, it's not about bailing out. It's a successful sector, but we're quite broad, so around that 𝗶𝗵𝗴 table, there are accountants, there's lawyers, there's consultants, there's architects, there's advertisers, there's people providing business services. There's not that common thread that you might get in other sectors. We are not dealing with a supply chain that builds up in a sort of pyramid style to produce a car. There's not that obvious thing. There's only one common thread that binds us together. And Paul hit the nail on the head, and it's people. And maybe the paradox of modern, successful, innovative professional in business services that embraces technology and AI is it still comes back to the people. We are a people-centered business that will need to be in the future focused on people. I think that's absolutely crucial, really, really important.
Yeah, I think you're right. The sector, I suppose, is only going to become more successful itself when the rest of the economy and all the other business sectors are more successful, because that's where we get our fees from, and that's where we can offer more advice. And we do see over and over, and I'm involved a lot in training in the accountancy world as well, that it's, as Paul said, it is the lack of confidence that these or desire that these accountants have that's not allowing them to have the right conversations and give the right advice. And I think that is going to be a real shift over the next few years. So moving on to specifically on funding and fueling these SMEs in the UK. What do you think about how accountants are responsible for driving the economy and making our SMEs thrive? I mean, surely we are so impactful potentially.
Well, I'd like to answer your question, Kirsty, and if I may, by mentioning the second point in responding to Paul, and I do think that they're linked. So Paul talked about, growing and having that journey, and I think that's really important for a number of levels. And I think the linking of chartered accountants is really important. Our members are going to be really important in that. So we're pretty good at starting up in this country. We've got a good record. It's relatively easy. We're something like third in the world for starting a business, in terms of that ease. We're not so good at scaling up. No. We're something like 13th in the world for scaling up. And that's the problem. We want those businesses certainly to start, but then to thrive. Far too many businesses fail in the first year. But one of the factors that would help is good business advice at the very start. So that notion of, and it could be, you're an entrepreneur, you've got a great idea, but you want to spend your capital, the capital that you've got that you might have scraped together, on sexy kit rather than business advice. Mm-hmm. And it is, if you obtain the services of an accountant, of a lawyer, that can help insure you against the risks of failures. It can put you on a path that means that you do avoid the mistakes. And that's really, really important. So, as I said, I think chartered accountants are so fundamental. And you mentioned the enabling role, Kirsty. The whole point of 𝗶𝗵𝗴 is, we rely on the strength of the rest of the economy through our advice, and accountants, lawyers, consultants, others. The whole business environment of the country thrives. We are very much, reliant on that success. We are enablers, facilitators in that regard. But if you have good, trusted business advisors throughout your business life cycle, you get to achieve what Paul was talking about, that people-centered approach. Talking about what keeps you awake at night means that you've got more chance of success and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's been really interesting. Thank you, Ian, to hear what ICAEW are doing and your role on the PBS Council. Really look forward to seeing what else comes out of that, and please keep us involved. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
guess just leaves me to wrap up now with what's coming next, Paul. In the usual updates that we talk about is we have got the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee meeting due on the 18th of December, right in the middle of Christmas party season, and as everybody is hoping to start relaxing to the party season and into the Christmas period. So, Paul, remember the prediction you made at the start of the year? How do you think you're doing?
Well, I called for 1% in rate cuts. We've had 75 basis points so far. You and I had a little bet as to whether it would be November or December for the
And
rate
I
cut.
lost.
But only because Rachel Reeves pushed her budget so late, and the Bank of
Yes,
England
I
obviously.
think it should have been a November cut, but it wasn't. So,
So I'm still of a view that I think that we'll get that in December. Time will tell. We've got 15 days.
yeah.
In terms of predictions or thoughts for next year, I think that I think we could see another 3 cuts, gradually, front loaded probably in the first, 50 basis points in the first half and 25, towards the end. So I might be a little bit more dovish in terms of those cuts. But if we haven't got any nasty inflation spikes coming through from wherever they may come from, because they are insidious and unknown. But assuming those things don't happen, then I think that we've got the opportunity for some lower rates, which will of course be a good place for us business entrepreneurs and mortgage holders to be in.
Yeah, I think it just boosts the feeling of hope as well, and if that continues into the new year, that'll be fantastic. So, look, watch out on our socials. We'll be recording another Economic Accounting Bites update in the new year, but we'll post out on socials in between as well what we think of any rate cuts, if we get them or not. So watch out for that, and have a great Christmas and New Year, everybody, whatever you're doing over the holiday. And thank you again, Ian. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Kirsty. Nice to see you, Paul.
Thanks, Kirsty.